The forest was dying. The trees, once green and lush, now stood as skeletal sentinels, their branches like bony fingers reaching towards the gray sky. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional snapping of twigs and the rustle of leaves. Aria wandered through the forest, her boots sinking into the damp earth. She was a small, wiry woman with skin the color of the forest floor and hair that seemed to absorb the faint light. Her eyes, however, shone like embers, burning with a fierce intensity. As she walked, the trees seemed to lean in, as if listening to her footsteps. The silence was almost palpable, a living, breathing entity that wrapped itself around her like a shroud. Aria felt it, a subtle vibration that resonated through every cell of her being. She had been walking for days, perhaps weeks. Time lost all meaning in this desolate landscape. The forest was vast, and she had seen no signs of life, no animals, no birds, no insects. Only the trees, standing like sentinels, watching her every move. And then she saw it, a break in the trees, a glimmer of light that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Aria's heart quickened, her breath catching in her throat. She approached the clearing cautiously, her senses on high alert. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe like living serpents. The air around it vibrated with an otherworldly power, a power that seemed to be calling to her, drawing her in with an irresistible force. As she drew closer, the symbols began to glow with a soft, ethereal light, casting an eerie illumination on the surrounding trees. The air seemed to hum with an electric tension, the vibrations growing stronger, more insistent. Aria's skin prickled with gooseflesh, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out a tentative hand, hesitating just shy of touching the stone. The symbols seemed to be shifting, rearranging themselves in a pattern that made no sense, yet felt strangely familiar. The humming grew louder, more intense, until it was almost deafening. Suddenly, the stone began to glow with an intense, blinding light. Aria felt herself being pulled forward, her hands stretching out, her fingers closing around the stone as if drawn by an unseen force. The symbols flashed brightly, then went dark, plunging the clearing into an eerie, flickering twilight. The silence was shattered by a sound like thunder, though the sky remained obstinately gray, unbroken by any storm. The earth seemed to shudder, and Aria felt the ground lurch beneath her feet. She stumbled, her grip on the stone the only thing keeping her upright. As the light faded, a figure emerged from the trees, its features indistinct, shifting like the symbols on the stone. It was tall, imposing, its presence filling the clearing with an unspoken power. Aria felt a shiver run down her spine as their eyes met, the connection between them crackling with an electric intensity. The figure's eyes burned with an inner fire, a fierce, golden light that seemed to see right through her. Aria felt herself being drawn into their depths, her own gaze locked on the strangers as if by an unseen force. The air was heavy with an unspoken understanding, a sense of recognition that went beyond words. The figure's features began to solidify, taking on a semblance of humanity. Skin like polished mahogany, hair that cascaded down its back like a waterfall of night. Its eyes, however, remained unchanged, those burning coals that seemed to pierce her very soul. "Aria," it said, the voice like the gentle rustling of leaves. "Daughter of the forest, keeper of the balance." Aria's mind reeled as the stranger approached her, its movements fluid, almost serpentine. She felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had known this being all her life. The stone, still clutched in her hand, seemed to be pulsing with a newfound energy, as if it had awakened a power within her. "You have been chosen," the stranger continued, its voice weaving a spell of quiet urgency. "Chosen to restore the balance, to heal the wounds that have been inflicted upon this land." Aria's gaze never left the stranger's, her mind racing with the implications of its words. She felt the weight of the forest's decay, the burden of its sickness, and the crushing responsibility that came with being its chosen savior. As the stranger spoke, The forest around them began to transform. The trees, once skeletal and dead, began to stir, their branches twitching, their roots stirring in the earth. The air was filled with a sweet, green scent, like the first shoots of spring bursting forth from the ground. Aria felt the power of the forest surging through her, a primal, wild energy that coursed through her veins like liquid fire. Her senses expanded, and she felt the pulse of the land, its rhythms and cadences, its hidden patterns and secrets. The stranger's eyes never left hers, its gaze burning with an inner intensity. "You have the power to heal," it said, its voice low and hypnotic, "to restore the balance, to bring life back to this dying land." Aria felt a surge of determination, a fierce resolve that coursed through her like a river of fire. She knew, in that moment, that she would do whatever it took to save the forest, to bring life back to this desolate landscape. But as she looked into the stranger's eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause, a hint of sadness, of regret, of a deeper knowledge that went beyond the simple task of healing the forest. "What's the cost?" Aria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's gaze faltered, its eyes flicking away, as if it couldn't meet her gaze. "The cost," it whispered, "is always higher than you think." Aria's heart skipped a beat as she sensed the weight of the stranger's words. She knew, in that moment, that the price of saving the forest would be steeper than she could ever imagine. The stranger's words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down that Aria couldn't ignore. She felt the weight of her decision, the burden of her responsibility, and the uncertainty of the path ahead. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice firm, her determination unwavering. The stranger's gaze snapped back to hers, its eyes burning with an intense, almost desperate urgency. "The Heartwood Tree," it said, its voice low and husky. "You must find the Heartwood Tree, the source of the forest's power. It is the key to restoring the balance, to bringing life back to this land." Aria's mind raced with the implications, the possibilities. She had heard whispers of the Heartwood Tree, a mythical hub of energy that fueled the forest's vitality. But where was it? How could she find it? The stranger's eyes seemed to bore into hers, as if reading her thoughts. "Follow the song of the forest," it said, its voice a mere whisper. "Listen to the rhythm of the land. It will guide you to the Heartwood Tree." Aria nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. She felt a thrill of excitement, of trepidation, as she contemplated the journey ahead. As she turned to leave, the stranger's hand shot out, its long fingers closing around her wrist. "Remember, Aria," it said, its voice low and deadly serious. "The balance is not just about healing the forest. It is about healing yourself." Aria's gaze snapped back to the stranger's, her eyes narrowing as she tried to decipher the hidden meaning behind its words. But the stranger's face was a mask, its eyes revealing nothing. As Aria pulled her wrist free, the stranger's grip lingering for a moment before releasing her, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The words echoed in her mind, a whispered warning that seemed to hint at secrets she had yet to uncover. She turned to leave, the forest's silence enveloping her like a shroud. The trees seemed to loom over her, their branches creaking softly in the stillness. Aria felt the weight of her task, the burden of her responsibility, as she set out to find the Heartwood Tree. As she walked, the forest began to change around her. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, their branches twisting into impossible shapes. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of loam and decay. Aria's senses grew sharper, her hearing attuned to the whispers of the forest floor. She walked for hours, the silence broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet. The forest seemed to be guiding her, the trees parting to reveal a narrow path that wound its way deeper into the woods. And then she heard it, a low, thrumming vibration, like the hum of 1,000 bees. The sound grew louder until Aria felt it in her bones, a resonance that seemed to awaken something deep within her. She pushed through the trees, and suddenly, she saw it. The Heartwood Tree, a towering monolith of ancient wood, its trunk as wide as a house, its branches reaching for the sky like giant arms. The tree pulsed with a soft, golden light, as if its very essence was alive.